If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 7. A Friendly Discussion, Part 2. The other ponies in the room looked at each other, and they all instantly and silently decided to pretend that Pinkie hadn't said anything before Twilight asked her what she thought.
Well, there's still someone here I should talk to,
said Twilight, smiling down at the dragon next to her.
But I think I already know what his opinion is.
I do like Chrysalis, Spike said, almost shyly. And all the changelings, too. They've all been really nice to me, and it's been like having two moms. Twilight blushed as her friends giggled, but then her face became serious.
Two moms? I wonder,
she murmured thoughtfully. After a few moments, her friends became restless, and she shook herself.
Sorry, I just had a thought. Chrysalis is always kind to her changelings, and it may not always look like it, but long-term, she really is. And she's nice to Spike, too. She might see him as my changeling, my hive.
Well, that's kind of interesting, I guess, said Applejack with a shrug.
No, don't you see?
Twilight said excitedly.
That's why she's always so mean to everyone. Okay, that's not right. It's why she's nice to the changelings and to me and Spike. We are part of her hive, and everything she does is to keep the hive safe and happy. If you're not part of the hive, you're her enemy, or at least not worthy of consideration. After so many years alone protecting her changelings, that must be the only way she can see things now. It doesn't really change anything, but at least it's a step towards understanding, towards getting her to interacting more casually with ponies.
Twilight deflated slowly.
If I get her back. If I want to get her back.
Twilight. Starlight shook her head in frustrated puzzlement.
You just spent 5 minutes arguing with me that she's a perfectly harmless and sweet little bug who means the world to you, and now you're going on like you two have broken up for good and you don't ever want to see her again. I mean, I'm sorry, but make up your mind. I'm trying!
Cried Twilight desperately, flopping forward on the table.
But every time I think I've figured out my feelings, something else pops up and I start leaning the other way. It's just all so confusing that I can't figure out what I want. Well,
said Fluttershy timidly after a moment,
I know someone who's really good at figuring out things that don't make sense. No!
Twilight's head snapped up.
Don't say his name. Don't even think.
Too late, said Discord cheerfully, head snaking out from behind her throne. Even an oblique reference is enough to get my attention. He looked around the throne room, smiling widely. Good to see every pony's here and doing well. Twilight! He cried, suddenly noticing who it was he'd responded to after popping into the room. It's really nice to see you here, and not Stone anymore either. Celeste figured out that whole mess much faster than I thought she would.
Where do you...
Whoops, dear me. Am I not where I thought he was? He pulled out a pair of reading glasses to peer intently at a tattered, leather-bound book that had appeared in one hand. Ah, yes, of course. You're the one who got married to the Bug Queen. See, look, I made a left at Amblekerky to get here, not a right.
What are you...
Twilight followed Discord's finger to the page he'd held up in front of her face, then suddenly jerked back, her hooves going to her eyes.
Ah! What is that?
Oh, you act like you've never seen a hyper-multi-dimensional travelogue before, complained Discord with a roll of his eyes.
I've never seen anything like that before.
She shuddered, her eyes still covered by her hooves.
What language was that? And the pictures? Maps? I don't even think those are images. It hurts my head just thinking about it, and not like a headache, but the thoughts themselves hurt.
Oh, fine. I'll put it away. Discord tossed the book over his shoulder, and it disappeared with a flash. But someone's going to have to teach you how to travel on the quantum fractal highways and leap from manifolds to D-brains eventually. And if your little son, princess, isn't going to do it, I might as well.
If it's going to be anything like that, then no thank you.
Twilight sat up, rubbing her head and glaring at Discord.
Why are you here?
I was going to ask you the very same thing. I just heard you call and came to help. He stretched out on the table, cradling his head in his palms and fluttering his eyelashes at Twilight. So, what can I do for you?
Nothing at all. In fact, we were just finishing up, so we've been talking about Twilight's marriage to Queen Chrysalis,
said Fluttershy, making Twilight groan.
Twilight isn't sure if she loves Chrysalis or not, and Chrysalis is divorcing her now.
Discord rubbed his chin with one hand, apparently actually giving the idea some serious thought. That is tricky. Love can be quite chaotic, of course, but I can't actually say it's in my wheelhouse. So I might have to... He suddenly snapped his fingers, then looked at the frozen ponies surrounding the table. Good, that should let us talk in privacy.
What did you...
Twilight looked at her friends as well, and suddenly realized they were standing as stiff as boards, not even breathing.
What did you do?
Oh, I just stopped time for a moment, no big deal. Discord waved a hand. Although we don't have much time, that is to say, our time to talk.
Why not?
Well, okay, let's say you have an engine running at full throttle, and then you decide to hold the crankshaft still. It might be okay for a fraction of a second, but what would happen to it after, well, not very long at all?
It would tear itself apart?
Ventured Twilight worriedly. Yes, exactly. Now imagine that engine is time. Twilight gulped, and Discord nodded. That's right. Also, this obviously doesn't work on alicorns, and KK gets ever so upset if I do it for too long.
Alright, fine. Make all your jokes and let's get this over with,
said Twilight with a sigh. Jokes? What? Discord put a hand to his chest. Why, if I was going to joke, don't you think I'd have kept the audience?
Then what is this all about?
Twilight snapped impatiently. I just want to tell you that you do love that deliciously twisted queen, of course.
Hey!
Twilight paused, blinking.
What?
Think for a moment, my precious little princess of books. In all the worlds, across all of time and space, what causes more chaos than love? It positively drips off of you wherever you two go, whenever you're together. In fact, I can see it on any two ponies who are in love. I bet you didn't notice, but I'm almost as good of a matchmaker as Cadence. He leaned in closer to Twilight, speaking in a low voice. Don't tell her this, but I was actually up for the title of Princess of Love back in the day. Turned it down, though. The tiara clashes with my beard. He sat back. And love aside, the sheer amount of chaos the two of you together would create would just be a positively delightful show. I mean, Equestria being peacefully invaded by an army of changelings all trying to adapt to pony culture, and ponies trying to coexist alongside a species that lives off their emotions. Why, the chaos that would create is second only to the potential for violence and bloodshed.
You... What?
Let me break this down for you, said Discord, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Twilight gulped and shrank back in her seat as he loomed over her, his eyes now burning red embers. The love you and Queen Chrysalis share, the chaos that represents, is so great that it rivals even the most magnificent of my works. To not see you two together would be to go against the very fabric of my being. I want the two of you to be together in happily married bliss more than I ever wanted to bathe Equestria in chaos. To put it another way, I ship you so hard it bends reality. Twilight, shaking and sweating, glanced around. The room had grown dark and oppressive, and a heavy fog had begun rolling out of the shadows. Things lurked in the fog. Things that at first appeared to be ponies, but the more she looked at them, the more they seemed to be shaped horribly wrong, twisted and bent in ways no living creature should ever be. Faintly, just at the edge of her hearing, she could hear whispers, promising her all the horrible things she lusted after in the far, dark corners of her heart, the things she'd never admitted even to herself that she wanted. And moreover, continued Discord, I am, despite your objections, your friend. That means I want to see you happy, and you have no idea how happy Chrysalis would make you. I used the phrase happily married bliss before, but that's only because I don't know any word stronger than bliss. That is what the two of you would share. Your marriage would become one of legend, heralded throughout the ages as the pinnacle to which two lovers can aspire. If you were to go through with your silly little divorce, I can guarantee you would feel regret later. But that would only be a simple pond compared to the ocean of regret you would feel if you knew how wonderful and sweet your marriage would have been. Twilight, no matter what direction your life takes from this point on, I can promise you this. There is no future in which you will be happier than the future in which you stay married to Queen Chrysalis and finally get it through your little pony head how very, very much you love her.
Are you...
Twilight blinked at him in stunned surprise.
Are you saying I do love her? And you think we'd be happy together?
Of course, Discord replied, his voice a sibilant hiss. What does it sound like I'm saying?
Well, it's just... Your eyes are glowing red, and the whole thing with the room and the darkness.
What? Discord turned to look at his eyes in the wall mirror floating next to him. Whoops! He turned around, waving his hands at the smoke and slowly dispersing it. Sorry about that. It's been so long since I've done this. I had the stupid thing still set to evil. This was supposed to be fluffy pink clouds and cherub ponies with bows and arrows that had little hearts on the end.
Well, maybe if you ever actually came to a dress rehearsal,
said one of the shadowy figures over his shoulder, as it slowly exited with the fog. Really, Jerry, you're going to do this now? Discord snorted in anger. I thought you were supposed to be a professional. Look, all of you just head back to casting and find some cherub outfits, and put the Eldritch Horror stuff back in storage.
Calling me unprofessional,
muttered the figure, finally vanishing. Jerry's actually a really great guy, said Discord apologetically. He's just been under a lot of stress lately. I guess his relationship with his girlfriend hasn't been going well. You know, I should do something nice for them. Maybe take them out to dinner at a fancy restaurant. Twilight scratched her head.
Can I just pretend none of that happened?
Probably for the best. Discord walked across the table to sit on its edge next to Twilight. He reached out a paw and she tensed up, but he just put it gently on her shoulder. Look, Twilight, he said, voice earnest. I could go on and on about how the two of you are a nexus of chaotic love like nothing I've ever seen, and so on and so forth. But that wouldn't mean anything to you, so I'll just keep it simple. I've seen enough of both of you to know you love her. The two of you are good together. She did hurt your family, but I think you can get past that. To see her for who she really is. To see how much she cares for you. If you can forgive me for all the terrible things I've done, you should be able to do the same for her. Go to her. Love her. It's what you want in your heart. Twilight wiped a tear from her eye.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Discord.
Yeah, well. He stood up, walking away from her so she couldn't see its expression. That's why I wanted to do it here, in private. I do have a reputation to uphold, you know.
Oh, I'm well aware.
Twilight snorted, then suddenly looked at him suspiciously.
So, is it wrong that I'm actually even more confused now? I do want to love her, but the fact that you also want me to makes me think I should do the exact opposite. I'm sorry, but I still find it kind of hard to trust you.
Oh, there's nothing wrong about that at all, said Discord quietly. Suddenly, the room was black again. Discord's face shoved up against hers, his eyes blazing like two little windows into the fires of hell. That just means you're learning. He snapped his fingers, and the room was back to normal, sans one Draconequus. Twilight looked around wildly, blinking, and her friend stared back at her.
Are you alright, Twilight?
Asked Rainbow Dash, concern in her voice.
You kinda spaced out there. What? But Discord was just hearing the shadows.
Twilight stammered, trying to put together a coherent explanation of what had just happened.
Sorry, Twilight, but no, he wasn't.
Fluttershy said apologetically.
I invited him, but he said he had dinner plans. He did say he wished you luck, though. And that Jerry did too? I'm not sure who that is. That annoying son of a bitch.
Twilight sat up straight for a moment, then slumped down again. She looked around the table at each one of her friends in turn, then looked away inside.
We weren't very much help, were we?
Asked Fluttershy, ears drooping.
No, you were. You girls have all given me a lot to think about. It's just...
Twilight let out another sigh, which turned into a groan.
I don't need more to think about. I need to know what to do next. I was hoping you'd all agree that I could use whatever consensus you came to as a guide, but instead all I got were the same arguments I've been going over in my head for the last few days.
Sorry, Twa, but you should have known it wouldn't be that simple, said Applejack with a shake of her head. I think that the fact that we can't agree should tell you this is something you need to decide for yourself. You can't just count on us to give you an easy answer.
Count on you? Easy answers? That's it!
Twilight beamed happily at her friends.
I trust all of you, so I can just have you vote, and whichever answer gets the most votes is what I'll do.
Wait.
Okay, who thinks I should stay married to Queen Chrysalis?
Rainbow Dash, Spike, and Pinkie Pie put their hooves and a claw in the air.
I also vote for parties!
Put in Pinkie Pie.
Parties and cake! Noted.
Twilight said, nodding gravely.
Now, who thinks we should separate?
Starlight raised her hoof forcefully and began waving it around. No, said Applejack.
Okay, so that's 2 for no.
No, you can't do this, Twilight.
Wait, so is that a yes? You should have voted during the first round then, Applejack.
Stop pretending you don't know what I mean, snapped Applejack, banging her hooves on the table. Twilight drew back, blinking, then slumped down with a guilty, sheepish expression on her face.
It's just so hard.
I know it is, but that ain't no excuse for trying to cheat or take shortcuts. Applejack glared at Twilight for a moment, eyes narrowed. You know, I'm just about ready to go get our resident expert on love and let her sort you out once and for all.
No!
Twilight jerked upright, a look of terror upon her face.
I'll be good. Please, anything but that.
I don't know. She might set you right in order, mused Applejack, a sly grin on her face.
That's the opposite of what you want, Applejack. Trust me.
Twilight pleaded.
You're telling me I should decide for myself what I want, and you are right. But if she were here, I wouldn't be able to do that. You know exactly what she'd tell me to do, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. She'd say, "Oh, Twilight, where are you?"
Rarity's voice suddenly rang throughout the castle, and every pony around the table froze.
I know you're in here somewhere. Run,
said Twilight. She and Starlight used their magic to grab up whatever loose furniture lay around the throne room, barricading the entrance. That done, Twilight quickly flapped her way up to one of the windows, pushing it open. Rainbow Dash went first, quickly turning into a pale blue dot that vanished into the distance. Fluttershy followed behind her, though not nearly as fast. And then there was a flash as Starlight, with Spike on her back, teleported onto the sill next to Twilight. She hopped out into the air, magic wrapping around her body to guide herself gently to the ground. And then Twilight turned back to the room.
Okay, you're first, Pinky.
She started to say, only to realize the pink pony was nowhere to be found.
First for what, Twilight?
Said a voice from behind, and Twilight spun, blinking as she saw Pinky sitting on the sill and regarding her with a questioning look.
First to leave now that everyone who can fly is out of the way?
Said Twilight hesitantly.
Oh, okay. Bye!
With a cheerful wave, Pinky jumped out the window, sliding down the steep side of the tree-shaped castle on her back.
Whee!
As the sound of her merriment faded into the distance, Twilight turned back to the last pony still in the room.
Hold on, Applejack,
she called, flapping her wings. She'd hardly moved at all before jerking to a halt, as someone began to pound hard on the door to the throne room, shaking the hastily thrown together barricade.
There's nowhere else you can be, Twilight!
Cried out the enraged Rarity.
So you let me in this instant!
Twilight hesitated, eyes darting between Applejack and the door.
Don't you dare,
yelled Applejack, just as an end table fell off of the barricade and the door cracked open an inch.
I'll tell every pony you died a hero,
called out Twilight over her shoulder as she shot out the window.
You lousy, no good yellow belly.
Applejack's ranting cut off as the doors burst open, scattering furniture across the room, and a fuming Rarity strode in.
Oh, Rarity, what a surprise to see you. Where is she?
Growled the fashion pony, trotting forward.
I don't know who you mean. Oh, are you talking about Twilight?
Applejack let out a nervous laugh, studying the ceiling for a desperate attempt to avoid Rarity's eyes.
You know, I just heard her talking the other day about wanting to visit Summers. Yeah, you know, Starlight's old friend. Also studies magic. They were meaning to discuss magic, so I think she's in the Crystal Empire right now.
Rarity had stopped, blinking in surprise. Now, seeing Applejack's scrunched up face, she chuckled and started forward again.
Applejack, you should know better than to try to lie, especially to me. Now come on, you're going to tell me everything.
Applejack gulped and tried to back away, but she'd already been as far from the door as she could be when Rarity busted in. So all she could do was whimper and slide to the floor as Rarity advanced, a grim smile on her face. But the rest of the day was filled with a merry chase through Ponyville, Twilight managing to stay a hoof step ahead of the meddling intent Rarity for longer than she had thought possible. Rarity had finally caught her, but with both ponies exhausted from the chase, all she'd been able to do was growl a few disapproving words at the princess before both had trudged back to their homes. But at night, things were different. Nights always woke somber moods in ponies. Luna had often been asked if that was her intention, but an enigmatic smile was always the only response. Ponies that had been bright and cheerful during the day became thoughtful and solemn when the night fell and darkness overtook the land. Optimistic thoughts became pessimistic, and the worst outcomes always seemed the most likely. So Twilight paced in her study by the light of candles. Occasionally, she'd glance over at her desk, where the packet of papers from the palace sat, waiting to be signed. She had a choice to make. One that would affect not only her life, but the lives of those closest to her, and possibly the lives of everyone in Equestria. With a deep breath, she stopped her pacing and tried to put everything into simple terms. Queen Chrysalis loved her, and she loved Queen Chrysalis, except she couldn't seem to actually feel that love. There was too much history between them. Chrysalis had done too much, pushed things too far. Twilight knew now that all of it, most of it, had been done out of love. It had all just been Chrysalis's way of expressing her love, and she thought Twilight had known that and had been going along with it. But Twilight hadn't, and it was too hard now for her to separate what she'd thought Chrysalis had been doing from what the Queen had actually been doing. She might have understood it all intellectually, but her heart was another matter. And despite all that, she still wanted to be friends with Chrysalis. She even wanted to love her, to return her deep, fierce affections. She'd tried to love the changeling. She'd tried her absolute best. She had dated Chrysalis for months, gone to her friends and family for advice, but nothing had been able to break through that barrier. She still wasn't able to feel the slightest bit of love beyond what she felt for any of her friends. Was she scared to? Was she just afraid of being in love? Or had everything Chrysalis done just been too much for her heart to forgive? Was her love lost forever because of a simple misunderstanding? Maybe so. Chrysalis had certainly believed it to be true, and she had left. Partly because she had known the futility of continuing to try and draw love from what seemed to be an empty well, and partly out of her own love for Twilight, to free Twilight from any obligation to try loving her. To, as one final act of love, free the pony she loved to go and find her own love somewhere else. The worst part was, Chrysalis had been right. There was no point in pretending. Twilight could fake being in love. They could even have a real marriage and a real relationship like that. It wasn't like she didn't love Chrysalis. She was just hung up on a few issues. Surely with time and enough love from Chrysalis. But Pinky's words had cut deeper than Twilight had thought. Now she could see another future. One where she and Chrysalis tried to pretend they both loved each other. It could work with any pony else in the world. But not with Chrysalis. Not with a changeling. No matter how they pretended, Chrysalis would know. And the longer things went on, the more they tried to lie to each other, the more bitter and angry Chrysalis would become. No. That path would only end in disaster. So, if Twilight couldn't pretend to love Chrysalis, and if she couldn't actually love her, then Chrysalis had been right to leave. Maybe this was how it had to be. Twilight slowly approached her desk. The paper sat on it, waiting. Sitting down in her chair, she began to leaf through the stack of forms. They all seemed fairly standard. Initial here, sign this, put a date here, and that pony you're married to will be out of your life forever. There was a familiar pang of sadness at that thought. but thinking of Chrysalis at all now brought that feeling. Other than that, she didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. So she began to fill out the paperwork. Initial here, sign this, put a date here. She worked slowly, methodically. She didn't want to mess this up, didn't want to draw things out. Finish it all here. End it cleanly, just like Chrysalis wanted. There wasn't much Twilight could do for her anymore, but she could do this right. It would be her last gift to the Queen. That's why she held the quill in her hoof, rather than simply using her magic. This was personal. Finally, Twilight came to the last page. There was one final signature, this one confirming that all the above signatures were correct, and that this truly was what the pony signing wanted. It was the last key that, when turned, would lock all of the chains in place. Signing this would remove Chrysalis from her life forever. Twilight thought all of this, staring at that empty line, waiting for her signature, and felt nothing different. Nothing that she hadn't felt before. So, with a steady hoof, she signed her name. Then she sat back, staring at her signature, the quill still in her hoof. That was it. Chrysalis was gone now. For good. It was all there, on official palace documents and signed by her, a princess. Now bound by the iron hand of law, she would never, ever, ever see Queen Chrysalis again. The words saying so were right there in front of her, in cold, black ink. The harsh reality of what that really meant was laying on her desk. And that realization began to beat inside her head to the pulse of her heart. Her hoof started to tremble.